What's going on, everybody? Today's video we're going to be doing a bunch of stuff to the GT350. What's going to be unique about this is all these parts right here are going to be going on the car, and what's cool about all those parts is I made all of them by hand. Alright, so with the addition of a larger lathe and mill to the shop, I ended up going with a Precision Matthews 1030 and a 25V mill with the DRO on the other side. I used my old little Harbor Freight one plenty often enough where I figured, you know what, a larger machine that can kind of turn down larger parts a little quicker might be a good addition to the shop. So let's go over some of the stuff we did. First thing we're going to do is the rear subframe centering spacers for the S550s. So they were super simple to do. Put that one off to the side right now. Another thing I did was I turned myself down a spherical bearing and the spacers. So this whole setup is going to go on the front. I think people call them the caster arm or radius arm. So that's going to get rid of that big rubber bushing. That goes with that. The next thing, this is something I'm really excited about. This little piece right here. This piece right here, along with, I don't have one, they're both on the car. I turned down some aluminum spacers kind of to take the place of the top spacer from the caster camber plates to allow the use of any 2.5-inch ID coilover spring on a stock unmodified Magneride strut. So this is an old GT, non-Magneride, but this lower perch is the same. So technically this probably could work on any GT350 strut. Shoot, maybe even the EcoBoost. Probably all have this same lower perch. So this is cast and fits right on there, and then you can see a 2.5-inch spring sits right on it, and then we have a whole little piece up here that is on the car at the moment. And then to go along with our front kit, we turned down an entire rear kit that goes in the rear control arm. Turning this down, this was the first time I ever tried to do internal threads. Turned out nice. Jacking bolt. You'll see how this all kind of goes on the car in a minute. All this stuff made by hand right there. And the cool thing about doing all this stuff is I now have a CAD model, and I'm really thinking about sending those off to get them machined in quantity. There's no way I can turn them down by hand in an economical fashion. But yeah, sending those out to a machine shop and just having them cut down a whole bunch. So if and when any of this gets turned into an actual kit, the front spring perch is definitely, I'm pretty sure, I'm 99.9% sure I'm the only one doing something like that for the front of these cars. Front spring rates on these are not very plentiful. Let me rephrase that too. Direct, easy bolt-on spring rates higher than like 250 are just like not really available. So that's what this kit will accomplish. So yeah, I'll turn these into products, and if and when they are available, I'll put them in the video description below. All right, so enough chatting. Let's get this thing lifted up and put all these parts on. All right, so we're starting on the rear. These giant bolts are already loose on each side and on the passenger side as well. I'm gonna put you guys down for a second. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push on this subframe. Forward, backwards. So you can see how much the subframe could technically move. So that's where these are going to come in. They just go up in there and take up that slot. Simple enough on them. While we're here, let's go ahead and take these all the way out. We're going to drop it down just enough to get the spring out. You know what, I might want to watch out for, let me get this one out. Should be good. You can see how the spring is already loose. We just got to come down a little bit more. All right, so spring is out of the way. My case was a little easier. As you notice, the strut is out. And the strut is out still from the wind tunnel, because we had to take the springs and struts out to do all of our ride heights and everything. So, all right. Now the lower part of ours, whoops, let's get the factory isolator out of the way. There's the lower. The upper has this little tab on top, which when it's slightly loose, goes up and in the factory perch and then sits in there like that. So what you have to do is hold it in there, but let it come down to where that square bracket gets trapped between some of those studs. There you go, I can feel it like locking in. So that's on. The lower we'll do in a second. The shim, as you can see, fits right in there. Tiny bit of play, but not nearly like what there was. I'm gonna kill two birds with one stone right here. I put our new 6-inch spring on before we lift the subframe back up. You can thread this all the way down and swap the spring with everything bolted in, which is kind of cool. But right now, you know, lifting it up, I could just do it all at once. All right, so we're coming up with everything and we have our spacers in. I'm gonna put you down like I did before. And what I'm gonna do is push the subframe forward and backwards. And keep in mind, everything is still loose. Pushing, you can probably see it move a little bit. So with all the bolts loose, you can see how much less movement there is. Now, let me be clear that when everything is bolted, tightened up, those spacers don't really see any loading or anything. The subframe won't move. The benefit of those is if you ever have to lower the subframe to change your springs, work on something, adjust something, you can lower your subframe, and as long as you don't touch any of your, toe settings or where the hell's the camber setting or camber setting, you could just bolt the subframe back up. Your alignment's good to go. You know that subframe hasn't moved, which would then make the car have like a weird toe in it or anything. All right, so the rear end is together. You can see the rear spring adjuster is in place. Not sure if I pointed it out, but this lower one is on a spherical, so it can kind of pivot, because as the control arm articulates, this kind of needs some movement in it. So that's in, and the subframe centering bushings are in there. Obviously can't see those, so rear end is back together, pretty good to go. At this point, we're gonna jump to the front end stuff. All right, so here's the strut out of the car. I already got everything loose for video purposes. But the part that will come in the kit will be this aluminum piece. I will get those anodized, probably black just because it goes with everything. I might do blue because that's kind of my company logo colors, but either way, this will be anodized. And as you can see, there's a bearing pressed in there. This assembly will have to fit around this little center part of the Vorschlag caster camber plate. Again, if you have a different company's caster camber plate, reach out. We could probably do something for you. So anyways, that part's easy enough. What makes this whole kit work is this one is a 3D printed mock-up that I was then able to make a final production piece out of. And it just sits right on the lower perch, just like that, giving you your flat perch to sit your coilover spring on. Again, this was already done for mock-up reasons, but once you get this assembly together, it goes on, put your nut on, and there you go. You're ready to go back in the car with this whole assembly. Now, I'll put a little picture up on the screen. I actually got it right here. I tried doing an adjustable spring perch. You can see how the threads, you can see how this piece was threaded, and this would have been sitting up at the top of the strut here, and then you can adjust your perch up and down. Problem is the thickness of this. You would have had to use a 6-inch spring, but a 6-inch spring would go solid before the strut would hit the bump stops, and it was just there just wasn't enough real estate for all that to work out. So in order to adjust height, again, these are 3D printed at the moment. They will be pieces of aluminum, but you can just shim underneath of the spring, because when the suspension droops, you have a little bit of room. As many times that I've had this up and down, the spring always just kind of finds center when you put the weight on it. So it's okay if the spring moves around. But anyway, so that's how you can fine tune height and corner balance with that. Let's see if we can watch it. There you go. Spring just kind of finds that perch every time. I opted for 350-pound springs. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. For this car, I believe BMR has the stiffest springs, which are only rated at 250. Hopefully an extra 100-pound spring rate in the front will be enough to help me out. I will probably have to shim it, because you got to realize if you go to a 400-pound spring or a 450, the height of the car is going to come up. So you probably won't need any spring shims under the spring. Or if you do need to get a tiny bit more height out of it, this little plate right here, which looks to be almost 1/8 of an inch thick, can come off, and this whole assembly would sit up in the car, that extra 1/8 of an inch. But when you're trying to fine tune stuff, 1/8 of an inch is, sometimes a decent adjustment. And while the front is all apart, we took the front radius arm out in order to do our bushing. I think early on in the video, I showed you this that I turned down. So let's get this pressed in. All right, so I'm on the press, ready to press out the factory one. You can see I squirted a little bit of PB Blast in there, hopefully let it slide out a little bit easier. Now, the one on the car, so I already did this one right here. And I was able to use some combination of just one of those like universal bearing press things, like this guy right here. Whatever fittings they came with, I believe like a large socket and some other bearing I had laying around. So it can be done, but to make this one a little bit easier, I machined this chunk of aluminum a few thousandths undersize of this, so it should be able to press it out a little bit easier. All right, so it's moving. Not putting the most amount of force on it. All right, so I brought this up a little bit just to reset with just less stuff on it. There we go. All right, so we're ready to go on, and I mic'd this side while it was off just to make sure it matched the passenger side, and it's within a few thousandths. This one's actually a little bit tighter. My spherical is machined to be not as hard to press out as the factory, but we still want a little bit of an interference fit. But we will be using a little bit of Loctite retaining compound in here, just as a little bit of a fail-safe. Since it's a pretty tight fit, just a tiny little bit, I'm gonna get a little bit of a workaround with my finger. All right, this is going relatively easy. There you go, spherical bearing pressed in. All right, now the snap ring goes on. All right, and then the spacers, and then it all goes back in. I'm going to go ahead and get the strut with our coilover conversion kit back installed and get the front end buttoned up. All right, guys, so everything is in, torqued, and the height on this thing actually looks pretty good. So let's grab a tape measure and see where we're at. So the rear, oh wow, I'm almost like dead on. I don't know, maybe a 16th high. Let's check the other side, because I kind of just put them on and they were what they were. Oops. Geez, how did I get that lucky? I don't know, 16th low on this side. So that'll be easy enough to adjust. The front, I never did one right above the wheel, which would have been nice. But I do have these on the door from the wind tunnel. Looks like we're going to be a little bit low in the front. And if we go to our splitter, I know we should be about 3 inches on the bottom. A little hard to tell. Maybe a 16th low. So I guess I forget what we were on the rear. The front maybe a tiny bit low, which is good. With whatever springs you have on the car, since we're a little bit low, that's good, because these just showed up. Just to test, I got 1/8 inch ones, so we can throw an 1/8 inch in, and we were like a 16th low, so we might be like a 16th high when we're all said and done. Adjust the rear real quick and we should be good. All right, so to adjust this from the rear, it's as simple as turning that threaded rod, and this side needs to come down, so we're gonna loosen it a little bit. And just for demonstration purposes, if you remember right, I think we were a 16th high on this side. Came down that little bit, and now we're like right on. So you can get real fiddly with that if you need it perfect. Let's bring the front up a tiny bit real quick. All right, so 2 quick notes before we go up with the car. I did a ride height from where we're at so we can see the actual change right above the wheel. As well as these are different this way to this way, if that makes sense. You can see how if you tried to put 2 of these wide ones together, they wouldn't line up with the holes on the lower perch. Now this is a GT strut, but this lower perch is the same on the left and right, Magneride or not. So that's why we can get away with just this one. Depending on what side of the car it goes on, it goes this way or it goes that way. All right, so with the car up and the weight on a jack stand, you can see we have plenty of room in this spring to put our shims on this lower perch here. All right, so I'm trying to do this in a way you guys can see, but it might be a little tricky. So we're gonna use, there's a hole right here and right here. And if we drop a bolt through it, you can see. And these shims again, the wider one is on this side, we're on the front right. And the hole should be offset to the front, which I think that looks right. So you lift the spring up, put him in. Put him in. There we go. All right. In the final kit, I'll probably use slightly more proper length hardware here. But I guess at the same time, if you used like a 300-pound spring, you might need 2, maybe even 3 shims stacked up here to get the proper ride height. So for video purposes, we're not going to tighten these down, but the shims won't come out from underneath of the spring. So we should be about an 1/8 inch higher on this corner now. All right, so back on the ground. This mark should be 28 and an 1/8. And 28, maybe picked up a little bit more. I could just be off on the tape measure a tiny bit. So yeah, there you go. Simple as that to kind of adjust the ride height. So rear's adjustable, front's adjustable. Rear is adjustable very finely because it's threaded. Front is adjustable. What I'll probably do in the kits when I turn this into a product is send them with like an 1/8 and a 16th, because this one, maybe a 16th would be a little more proper right there. But you get the idea. You can kind of shim it, and a 16th of an inch, you know, you can do math across your spring rate to know how much that will add to your corner balance as well. Now, as far as testing spring rates, anybody who saw the videos of me designing these compressible splitter rods, I'll put a tag up here if you didn't see it, but I was able to bounce on this. I'll put you guys down to watch. There we go. I can make the splitter touch the ground, but I gotta really get on it. So I know it's not scientific, just kind of cool to see. I could also do, let's see if I could do it in one jump. All right, well, with the old springs, what I was just doing, I was able to get the splitter to hit the ground. This time I can't, so again, not very scientific, but cool to do. All right, guys, so that's where I'm gonna wrap this project up. In real world time, I'm a couple weeks ahead. I actually already did a track day with this. If you want to see that video, hit that subscribe button because it's coming out in a little bit after I post this one. Initial feedback on all the parts that I just put on. The coilover conversion kit and the stiffer springs worked awesome. Splitter scraping was the big issue I was trying to fix. I would say got rid of 90% of the scraping issue. Now VIR does have a couple like hard compression areas or bump areas, and I was still, I'll show you the splitter biscuit. You can see was taking a bunch of it. This one worn down a little bit more. Those splitter biscuits are available on my website, link to my website below, and they can be put on any splitter, obviously not just mine. On top of that are compressible splitter rods. These are my initial mock-ups, so kind of don't mind the fact that they're not finished super nicely, but the concept is the same. These are available on the website, but when you would hit the track, you can see how they give in an upward position, or upward direction, if you will. So when the splitter does hit the track, it's all the weight of the car isn't just like going into the splitter, you know, it gives up a little bit. So splitter worked great. Splitter biscuits, splitter rods, stiffer springs, everything all together allowed me to push harder. Ended up dropping another like 2.3 seconds off my personal best. In my track day video, I'll get into like data a little bit. I think that's beyond the scope of this video. One thing I will add real quick, I did get a set of Steeda caster cam. Here's one still all together. So Steeda plates. I'm working on a coilover conversion kit for the Steeda, as well as if there's other brands out there that utilize the top spring. If they utilize this top spring perch with this little bearing in it right here, I would assume, I don't want to call it version 2, but like the Steeda specific version should work for you as well. So yeah, I'm so happy with how everything came out. I will be turning these into actual parts. But yeah, I think that's about where I'm going to have to wrap this one up. As always, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one.